Let's bring in Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Singapore's Foreign Affairs Minister. He joins us from elsewhere in Singapore. Minister, great to see you again, and always appreciate your time. So we're back to tighter restrictions in Singapore. 10 new community cases reported yesterday, and over the last week or so, I want to know, how concerning is it that when this fresh wave started, it included infections among at least one person who had been already vaccinated before, and that these new clusters that are emerging happen to be in hospitals as well?
Well, thank you. Good morning, both of you. How concerning it is? We are concerned. Let me just make 3 quick points. The first point is that COVID-19 is endemic in humanity, which means it's not ever going to go away completely. And the reason it's not going to go away completely is because it's been widespread throughout the world. There's sufficient critical mass. The rate of mutations and new variants will keep going. And the level of human immunity will also wax and wane. So that's first point. It's permanent. Second point is that vaccination is absolutely critical. It's essential, but it is not a panacea. And you can't vaccinate your way out of an epidemic exponential explosion. That's the second point. Essential, but not sufficient. The third point is that therefore we must anticipate oscillation over the next 2 years. As waves come and the necessity for social restrictions and tightening and borders, these measures will have to come and go according in response to these successive waves. So we're just going to have to get used to it. It's specifically now in Singapore, we obviously have some low level of community transmission, and that's what we're trying to clamp down on very hard. And that's why the recently announced social restrictions. As far as vaccinations are concerned, we vaccinated about 20% of the population. To be honest with you, it's not really the vaccinated people I'm worried about. It's those who are not vaccinated. Our recent experience in a hospital cluster shows that people who are vaccinated, in fact, have less symptoms, have less severe disease, have not yet needed to even have oxygen therapy. That's not the case for those who are not vaccinated. So right now in Singapore, and in fact, throughout the world, as we go through this phase where some people are vaccinated and others are not, in fact, it is a more dangerous period for people who are either going to be complacent on one hand, or for people who are not going to have the protection from vaccination on the other hand. So this is something we're going to have to watch very closely.
Indeed, all your points taken on board, Minister. Let me ask you then, in terms of reaching herd immunity for the government in Singapore, how do you define that? Is it 70, 75, 80? And do you have a time frame target when you would want that herd immunity level, that percentage, to be reached of the population, that is?
We don't have a defined threshold of herd immunity. And let me explain why. First, as new variants keep evolving, and as these new variants, in fact, appear to be more infectious than the original strain, the level of herd immunity mathematically will change. Second reason is we know now, with the benefit of 1 year's experience, that even the immunity to natural infection appears to wane with time. And although it's too early to give you be definite about vaccination, it is likely that the immunity from vaccination may also wane with time. So the point is, you can't expect to say you've reached a magic figure and you're suddenly immune and it's mask off and no restrictions. The point I'm making is that this current oscillation between restrictions, relaxation, and the necessity for masks and the necessity to keep vaccination, these imperatives will remain. So there is no magic threshold.
Okay, understood. Singapore's numbers, relatively speaking, are still low, including the new cases, the new surge. But does this increase the risk that there will be, that the country and the population will be more vulnerable to mutations of the virus. It seems to happen wherever there are surges. It's happening obviously in India, although that is not a comparison. But and also, can you confirm that the double mutation, the B1617 variant, has been detected in Singapore?
Yes, it has. I mean, that's not a surprise. We know that the variants are the ones which, in fact, in other parts of the world have become the majority strain. And therefore, it's no surprise for a tiny city-state which needs to continue to have some level of opening at the borders, that we are going to be exposed to these new variants. So this is not a surprise at all. The only question is, how much more contagious is it and how much more virulent is it? And therefore, the question for each country is how prepared you are. What is the level of your vaccination program? What is the level of your preparation in terms of your healthcare facilities? You know, the main problem with this is that it is an absolute tragedy when your healthcare systems are overwhelmed and people who in fact should recover and should have been saved are not saved because you're overwhelmed. And this is where the question of scale, of numbers comes into the picture. So we've got to always take this seriously and perhaps lean towards overreacting rather than to underreact and to do too little, too late. That's the key lesson from this pandemic.
Minister, understood. So you are operating through a clear abundance of caution here. And I wanted to ask you, what are the implications then for quarantine-free travel under the travel bubble between Singapore and Hong Kong? Is that still going to go ahead as planned on May the 26th?
Well, if I come back to my third point, that there will be oscillations. And what that means, therefore, is bubbles can grow or burst very quickly. And we need to just take that on board. So as of now, the plan is yes, but we will have to watch how the situation evolves over the next few days. And in fact, you will notice that the arrangements that we've made with Hong Kong and in fact with the other arrangements that we're discussing with other countries will always have these preset thresholds at which the level of opening will have to change or even temporarily stop. So we'll just have to get used to these oscillations.
Singapore has deep connections, historical connections with India, Minister. We all know that. What is your message to the country that is undergoing this devastating crisis at the moment with the resurgence? Are you standing by with more support and assistance? And where does this leave travel between Singapore and India?
Well, right now, you know that we have severely restricted travel between India and Singapore. And that's because of the tragic situation that's unfolding across India. You know that we are very deeply concerned. I received a message from Jai Shankar on the 22nd. Within the next day or two, we sent cryogenic tankers via the Indian Air Force to help India. 2 days after that, we sent additional oxygen cylinders. And then a week after that, even our private sector and our Indian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore sent additional supplies, thousands of oxygen cylinders via Indian naval ships. So there's no question about our concern, no question that we stand with India, and we will do our bit to help them to overcome this current problem. But I want to say that this is a very significant and major tragedy that's unfolding, and it's still early days. It's going to take quite some time before the situation resolves.
Minister, there's also a narrative over whether vaccinations should be widened, the program that is, to include a younger demographic, children between the ages of 12 and 15. This is a conversation that's happening on a global basis. Is Singapore closer to a decision, sir?
Oh, we're certainly looking at this. We're waiting for the results of the studies on vaccination in children or in teenagers to come in. And if it's proven that it is safe and efficacious, we will certainly do so. In fact, if you watch the early data on the variants, it's clear that it is more effective. It's also clear that younger people are susceptible to the variants. And there's also some preliminary data that it also seems to be clinically more severe than the original strains, especially in younger people. So all this means we've got to keep an open mind and be prepared to vaccinate even younger age groups once the data is in. So we're looking at this very, very actively.
And if we could just turn the picture back domestically, if we can, how serious is the risk that of these new clusters of reinfections? You were talking about reinfections, Minister, and how serious is it that the foreign worker dormitories could once again become clusters themselves, or have we learnt the lesson from what happened last year in 2020?
The key lesson is not to be complacent. So far, we don't have a problem, but we need to be very, very watchful. What's different from a year ago is the fact that we've got such expanded testing capacity, both PCR and antigen rapid tests, and that we are testing everyone at least once every fortnight. Second, that our tracing capacity also has been upscaled. Our digital contact tracing system now covers more than 92% of the population. We're very quickly able to identify all close contacts and to take the appropriate actions to isolate and to clamp down any clusters very, very early. So there's some reason for hope, but never, never be complacent. We can't afford it.
Minister, if we could move on and talk about another vexing issue for your portfolio specifically, which is foreign affairs, and this has to do with the situation in Myanmar. It was not that long ago that Singapore, as part of ASEAN, managed a rare achievement, that is sitting down with the military government of Myanmar and agreeing that, look, this killing, this violence must stop. Obviously, it has not. It has continued, if not increased. I mean, the country's on the brink of, if not civil war, potentially of being a failed state. What do you think should be done, one? And two, realistically, what do you think can be done?
Well, in terms of what should be done, you just need to look at the ASEAN consensus a fortnight ago. Number one, the violence must stop. Number two, you do need to release the political detainees. So that the third point is that honest, direct negotiations between the NLD, the civilian government on one hand, and the Tatmadaw, the military authorities on the other hand, can proceed in good faith. Without this national conversation and reconciliation, you're not going to see any progress in Myanmar. Indeed, the signs of a potential civil war are there. In fact, it's worth remembering that, in fact, Myanmar has gone through more than 7 decades of ethnic conflict. But now the problem is that even the Burman majority themselves are restive, are unhappy, are restless. And every day, it's heartbreaking to see the reports on fatalities and injuries. And all this is so unnecessary. All this is so tragic. So ASEAN stands ready to help. We've offered to send envoys there. We've offered to play the role of an honest broker. We've also offered humanitarian assistance. But the ball is now in the court of the military authorities, and they've got to decide when and how we can constructively play a role to help this national reconciliation occur.
Constructively play a role, Minister. Would sanctions pressure be part of the response from ASEAN, or do you feel that that would be counterproductive?
Well, we have taken the stand that broad-based indiscriminate sanctions would be counterproductive, basically because that would hurt ordinary people. But targeted sanctions, which is what many countries have already announced, I think that's part of the menu. But we need to understand that the Tatmadaw has withstood decades of isolation, of sanctions. And they've got a very high threshold for pain, especially if the pain is being felt by the people rather than themselves. So sanctions I see as part of the menu, but not sufficient to achieve a solution. In the end, you still need a political outcome. In the Myanmar body politic, both the military and the civilian poles of power are integral to any future solution. And you need both poles to talk, you need to engage, and they need to work out a suitable compromise or a suitable formulation in which there's sufficient reassurance to both sides. And this process of democratic transition can occur. This is absolutely essential. Otherwise, they'll just continue doing what has happened over the past 7 decades. And it's really sad because we all work with colleagues from Myanmar. We know what wonderful people they are, how hardworking, how disciplined, how imaginative. Myanmar and its people deserve so much more. And we hope that they get what they deserve, the people of Myanmar.
Indeed, I think a lot of people would agree with you, Minister. So, as you know, obviously, the West is attempting more targeted sanctions on businesses, very big businesses controlled by the military, the Tatmadaw in Myanmar. We'll have to see whether that works and whether or not they end up being counterproductive and hurting the people of Myanmar instead. As far as Singapore goes, though, I don't mean to back you into a corner, but this is going to be controversial. At least anecdotally, many military leaders in Myanmar, not just the current generation, but previous generations, have looked at Singapore as a haven for their commercial interests, for, bluntly, their money, for their family, for their children, for their education, for their homes abroad, etc. Is the government considering, or should the government consider, specific sanctions on current generation individuals in the Myanmar military, which hit them in the pocket as opposed to hurting the Myanmar people?
Well, let me first put things in context. Singapore is an open city state. We're a financial center. We're an excellent healthcare center. Our academic institutions are top-notch. So there's no question that people from our region often look to Singapore when they're looking for a place to educate their children, or to access healthcare, or to access financial services. And this is not something unique to the elite in Myanmar. This, in fact, applies across the region. Second point is that, in fact, if you look at the current situation, none of the coup leaders or their immediate family members are in Singapore. We've had the Monetary Authority of Singapore conduct financial surveillance. There are no significant sums from individuals or corporate entities of Myanmar here in Singapore. So I think we need to look at it in context. Now, the additional point I would make is that we believe in engagement. We believe in engagement with all sides, because as I said earlier, the only way you're going to get a solution is if all these parties sit down at a table, talk to one another in good faith. Now, to the extent that we maintain open lines of communication and have reservoirs of trust and goodwill with all parties, this also enables us to play a constructive role. So we will play the role of an honest broker. We would, of course, comply with all international sanctions decided by the United Nations Security Council. And we would also advise all corporations to be very careful when dealing with sanctioned individuals in order not to get into trouble on the corporate front. So we're very careful in playing this role, but we believe that Singapore can therefore be an honest, reliable broker for conversations, real national conversations to occur. So let's wait and see. So you will notice that we call a spade a spade. It's a coup. It's a coup has occurred, and we've said so. This is a tragedy, and we've said so. We have condemned the violence, no question about that. But we have still continued to talk. And that's why the ASEAN leaders invited the Commander-in-Chief, Ming Online, to attend the ASEAN leaders meeting in Jakarta a fortnight ago. That's the role, and that's how we hope that we can play a constructive bid to bring national reconciliation in Myanmar.
Minister, if we can bring it back and circle back to Singapore and the domestic economy, do these latest restrictions act as a setback on the recovery here? And what is your best estimate, sir, on when Singapore's economic activity can return to pre-pandemic levels?
Well, our current restrictions, we have said, will apply till the end of the month. We will continue to review the situation very, very carefully. This is a setback. There will be some impact. But actually, if you zoom out and take a longer view, our assessment is that this year should certainly be much better than last year. But even then, it's really about recovering to where we were before, making up for lost ground. What happens over the next 1 or 2 years will depend very much on the global situation. If you look carefully at our economy, certainly tourism, aviation, that's very severely impacted. But there are green shoots of growth, certainly in the digital side of the economy, on finance, on logistics, on e-commerce. And it's a matter of trying to restructure our economy whilst dealing with the immediate and urgent oscillatory problems posed by the pandemic. So I would characterize our posture as one of very careful watchfulness whilst continuing with the hard work of restructuring the economy, doing whatever we need to do to keep the epidemic at bay, whilst enabling our people to continue getting on with their jobs.
Minister, several minutes ago when we were talking about Myanmar, you talked about Singapore wanting to act as an honest broker, as it were. Obviously, Singapore's not the only country attempting that. Indonesia, if I'm not mistaken, is very assertive and very active on that front as well. But in terms of Singapore's involvement with other Southeast Asian nations, and with regards to Indonesia, you had the tragedy not so long ago of an Indonesian submarine being lost at sea, all hands lost at sea, in fact, 53 crew on board. Singapore sent a search vessel to aid to locate and find the wreckage. What I'm trying to get at here is, and this is cross-portfolio because obviously this has implications for defense as well. Are you concerned that there is an arms race in this part of the world in Southeast Asia, with so many nations acquiring submarines, one, and two more specifically, and this is more for the defense minister, but while we have you, I'd like to get your thoughts, if whatever you're able to tell us. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Navy was set to take delivery of their first new, fresh submarine this month to start replacing the pre-loved ones that the RSN had before. Given the Indonesian tragedy, is that delivery still on track?
Well, I can't get into operational details, but let me answer your question. First, is there an arms race? No, there isn't an arms race. Second point I would make is that the governments across Southeast Asia, and in particular, since your question is about Indonesia and us, we're close, we're in constant communication. We will help each other, especially when crises occur. And this reflex to reach out, to extend a hand, and to be present whenever an emergency occurs. I mean, these are all positive indicators of the strength of the relationship.
Yeah. So
I would characterize our relations as excellent, and in fact, this goes across ASEAN and Southeast Asia. But in fact, the greater problem is actually at a global level. The biggest dynamic competition or potential for trouble is between the United States and China.
Indeed.
And Southeast Asia wants to ensure that we do not become an arena for
understood.
negative competition, or worse, a conflict or confrontation.
Absolutely
so that's
understood.
our concern.
Okay. Minister, I'm so sorry. We're just out of time. Always love talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your morning with us. Keep safe. We'll do it again very soon.